First, I did a video that took on the Voting Rights Act. Then, I did a second video that took on the Supreme Court. To end this trilogy, I am going to offer historical context and share solutions to restore the Voting Rights Act once and for all. As I mentioned, the Voting Rights Act was signed into law by President Lyndon Johnson in 1965. But it's important to understand how the Voting Rights Act came to be. There are only 4 states where the highest percentage of the population is not white people. In every other state, the majority of the population is white people. Still, there are 6 states that have a population of 25% or higher of Black Americans. 5 of those states are the ones I mentioned in the previous video: Alabama, South Carolina, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi. All of these states were part of the Confederacy in the Civil War. And for those of you that need a reminder, the Civil War was fought because the southern states decided they would rather go to war against their own country instead of ending the slavery of Black people. After the Civil War, 3 amendments to the Constitution were passed to protect the rights of Black Americans. The 13th Amendment ended slavery. The 14th Amendment guaranteed birthright citizenship and equal protection under the law. The 15th Amendment made sure that no one was prohibited from voting because of the color of their skin. But remember, the South was populated with a whole lot of racist, sore losers who still did whatever they could to disenfranchise Black Americans. When it came to having actual political power, they would dilute any coalition of Black voters by gerrymandering state and federal districts. 100 years after the end of the Civil War, Congress used their power under Article 1, Section 4 to pass the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act has been updated multiple times to extend protections, most recently in 2006 by George W. Bush. The most significant update happened in 1982. President Ronald Reagan updated the Voting Rights Act, establishing that proof of discriminatory results, rather than intent, could be used to enforce Section 2. But there was a young lawyer in the administration that objected to this update. That lawyer was John Roberts. This 1982 update was what the Supreme Court recently struck down while trying to gaslight the American people into thinking that Section 2 still exists. But the ruling effectively makes Section 2 unenforceable by the courts. Think of it this way. This ruling is like not being able to convict someone for murder, even though there are multiple eyewitnesses and forensic DNA evidence proving that this person committed murder, all because the murderer didn't actually confess to what everyone knows they did. Republicans aren't going to publicly say that they are disenfranchising Black voters. They're just going to do it. And those of us with 2 eyes and a brain know that what is going on right now in the Confederate States is racist. When I did a video on partisan gerrymandering, I explained that Congress could use the census data to restrict both parties from breaking up large counties to keep districts safe from partisan gerrymandering. Under my proposed plan, the Republicans of Tennessee would not be allowed to break up Nashville or Memphis. It would have nothing to do with racial demographics or even partisan demographics. It's just basic math. In fact, if you compare my map to the previous map of Tennessee, the district centered around Memphis is more compact on my map since the district is entirely within the border of Shelby County. Still, in both of these maps, the district would be made up of 60% Black Americans. And while this partisan gerrymandering protection will work in Tennessee, based on the numbers, it will not work in other states. Because of that, we still have to make a very specific update. Both Louisiana and Alabama had to argue in front of the Supreme Court about adding a second majority-minority district because there was no mathematical formula within the Voting Rights Act to determine how many of those districts should have been created. But what if there were? Just like with partisan gerrymandering, we can write math into the law that would ensure that a certain number of majority-minority districts have to be drawn. I'm not going to bore you with the complicated formula I've come up with, but I can assure you that in those 5 southern states, the formula would require a certain number of majority-minority districts to be created after each census. I have found a way to protect Black Americans in the South by using math. At the end of the day, the main obstacle for restoring the Voting Rights Act hasn't changed. We have a Supreme Court that openly accepts bribes from billionaires. We have a Supreme Court that lies during confirmation hearings about upholding precedents before undoing those precedents the first chance they get. We have a Supreme Court that knew that the Voting Rights Act protected Black Americans from discrimination, and they dismantled it anyway. We need to rebuild and reform the entire American judiciary branch from the ground up and get a new and expanded Supreme Court that is actually held accountable by Congress and by the American people. The Voting Rights Act was one of the most important laws in American history. And now that law is gone, and Americans need to fight like hell to get it back.